Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's lecture titled Artist as Artrepreneur. Peters Valley would like to thank its sponsors for making programs like this possible, and you. Thank you so much for being here, whether you're here in person or electronically on Zoom. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy tonight's program. I am pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann has been making a living as a contemporary American metalsmith and jewelry designer for the past 5 decades. He is from Allentown, PA, and has planted his roots in New Orleans, Louisiana, where his studio is located. He has served on the board of directors of the American Crafts Council, where he was the publisher of American Craft Magazine and the ACC Craft Fairs. Also on the directors of SNAG, the Society of North American Goldsmiths, where he was the publisher of Metalsmith Magazine, and the CAC Contemporary Arts Center of New Orleans and Planned Parenthood of Louisiana. Thomas exhibits his work in galleries, shops, and stores across the United States and internationally, and most recently was the artist in residence for 2 months in Hobart, Tasmania, Australia, sponsored by the Despard Gallery, and in Allentown, PA, sponsored by Penn State University and Center City Corp. His lecture presentation, The Artist as Artrepreneur, tracks his personal career development in parallel with the American Crafts Council and the American Crafts Movement from the 1960s until now, and includes the 10 major factors that have dramatically changed the way that artists must conduct themselves and their businesses in order to survive. Please help me welcome Thomas Mann. All right.
Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm in the pavilion, at the dining pavilion at Peters Valley Craft School in Layton, New Jersey, where I have been conducting a quote unquote master class with a lovely group of students who are doing a great job and making me feel good about the information I have to share with them. This is a lecture that I initially did in 2017 for the Society of North American Goldsmiths Conference in New Orleans. And this is a historical reference so that we all have a good idea about where we come from and where we might be going as a craft community. There are 2 major events that took place in our past that made everything that we are enjoying at the moment possible. And the first one was World War II and the GI Bill. And the next one was the creation of the American Crafts Council under the auspices and the philanthropy of a woman named Eileen Webb, who was the doyen of a wealthy New York family. So I'm going to show you a series of slides that kind of lead up to the final summation of this whole presentation. And I'm going to ask you to imagine that at the moment you're in New Orleans. Then I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're in North Carolina, and then in New York City, and then in a wide variety of sites around the US. So this is 2017. I am on my way on my scooter to give this lecture at the SNAG conference in New Orleans. I arrived at Lee's Circle on the way to the hotel where the convention was taking place. And at that moment, they were taking down the sculpture of Robert E. Lee. And this led to a whole vast series of the redeployment of Confederate statues in New Orleans to storage. Okay, very good. An adjustment in lighting. And so it was a very important moment, not only for New Orleans, but for all of us in the United States, to understand that we are at a turning point historically about where we have come as a nation and where we might be going as a nation, right? And so it was a very, very interesting because Robert Lee was facing north at the top of a large pedestal, looking north to the lost cause of the Confederate South, right? And right now, that Lee Circle is being renamed and rededicated. And I'm sorry, I can't reveal what that is at the moment because I haven't gotten notice of it yet, but it is in process of being renamed and rededicated to a much brighter kind of idea of the future. Compelled to make. So I know very well that many of us have this kind of gene in us that make us absolutely compelled to create objects of meaning and beauty to share with the world. And I believe personally that it is my mission to make these kinds of objects because it connects people to the universal in a way that they may not find connection otherwise. So when I sit down at the workbench, I'm always thinking about imbuing those objects with as much meaning and purpose as I possibly can. Artist as Artrepreneur, a career travelogue. Okay, so this is me in 2022. This is my 52nd year as a self-employed jeweler. I learned jewelry making in a high school art program in 1963, where I quickly discovered the connection between jewelry, money, and girls. And I am still working that angle, right? But I have had lots of really memorable experience over the course of my career, and I tell everybody that I absolutely lead a charmed life as a result of dedication to this craft. I'm not getting rich. I've done okay. I'm happy with where I am. But if the opportunity ever arose to do better, I would certainly take advantage of it. I've been buying lottery tickets lately. Yeah. The course that I'm offering here to my friends here at Peters Valley is based on a miniaturization of a workshop I've been teaching since 1989 called Design for Survival. That was a 2-week workshop that I taught at Penland School in North Carolina. And it's basically titled Design for Survival, Entrepreneurial Thinking and Tactics for Artists. And it doesn't matter what medium, it's all applicable to everybody. So this is a kind of a subset of that 2-week class into a 1-week with hands-on and with actual making and demonstrations, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I discovered in the course of doing many workshops around the country was that I had to teach people how to use a jeweler's saw before they could do any of the other tasks I might have for them. And I would try to teach them in context with the class, and I realized it was too much. So I learned to saw out as a single workshop in and of itself. I wrote a book to go with it, a little pamphlet that because I've been doing production jewelry for a lot of my career, and I've had as many as 26 employees at one time in the mid-90s, and I was always paying people to learn how to make jewelry for me. I got pretty good at figuring out how to train people really quickly to get their skill set in place to be able to make the work we had for them. I wrote this little pamphlet. I put a kit together, and you'll see some other ramifications of it. But that book has sold through 17,000 copies worldwide, produced by Northlight Books. It's now out of print. In 2001, my personal book, Thomas Mann, Metal Artist, published by Guild Publishing, which you now know as Artful Home, came out, and it was the last book that they ever published. That book has sold through 25,000 copies. And now I'm all about being a book, and I'm working on the next one. So here's a list of the other things that I've done, but we're just going to move on from that. Okay. The genetic imperative. I discovered recently that my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Hernandez, was a shoemaker and a musician in St. Augustine, Florida in the 1800s. My great-grandfather, Hubert Hernandez, was a jeweler. My grandfather, my great-aunt, Theodora, was a dress designer in 1888. My grandfather, Roger, was a surrealist photographer in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And my dad, Bob, Robert Mann, was a very creative maker of many things. He was a machinist, he was an inventor, he was a TV repairman, he did everything. And he taught his kids, my sister, my brother, and I, all of the skill sets that he knew how to use tools. This is my grandfather, Roger. This is a pin that I made with Roger's image in it for my mother, her father. This is him in a photograph in Allentown of his photographic club in 1921, right. This is my family at the Jersey Shore. This is me sitting on my dad's knee. Says, where the hell am I and who are these people? This is my high school where I learned jewelry making. This is my dad in the military. He landed in the third wave at Omaha Beach and walked across France and Germany. He is the epitome of the Billy Joel song, Allentown. Fought the Second World War, spends their weekends at the Jersey Shore. This is my first jewelry bench in the bedroom on the bench that my dad built for me. This is the solid stainless steel bracelet mandrel my dad turned on a lathe at Bethlehem Steel and smuggled it out of the plant in a thermos bottle. He made me several of these, and I would go to the local silversmiths and trade them for time in their shop, materials, and a little bit of instruction. Eventually, I got hired by them, and I became a buffing bunny. All I did was polish silver. This is C. Leslie Smith's silversmith shop back in the 1960s. This is their shop. It moved to another location in Allentown, and this is the last guy working in that shop. And it's not C. Leslie. He passed a while ago. But there is the bracelet mandrel. This is my mom, Charlotte. She's totally responsible for getting me kind of like tuned up to be an artist. She put me in, when I was 8 years old, she put me in classes at the Baum School of Art in Allentown. She was always supportive of whatever I wanted to do, including being a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. This is the Baum School that I attended on Saturdays back in the day. This is an interesting story and one that is pivotal to the success of my career. Do you recognize the work? Anybody recognize this work? Okay, this is Harry Bertoya. So a friend of mine in college, we were both art students in college, said, hey, I know this guy Harry, he's having a show at the Allentown Museum. We should go down there, because I was going to school in East Stroudsburg, not far from here, just down the river, just down the Delaware River from here. I'll say, okay, well, let's go see it. Let's go. So we went to the show, and there were a lot of people there. But afterwards, Harry invited my friend and I out to a bar, even though we were underage, we could still do it then, with a friend of his. And at that bar, we had, they snuck us a couple beers or whatever. But after a while, they were talking together. They paid us some attention, and they said, oh, you guys are art students, so we have some advice for you. It was a little bit longer than that, but anyway, they said, listen, you're never going to make any money from your work. That's not how you're going to succeed. So as soon as you have made any money at all, buy real estate. Right? And we went, well, okay, well, we were totally blown away by whatever this presentation was. But anyway, I followed the advice, and 4 years later bought my first piece of real estate, right? And these two guys were Klaus Oldenburg and Harry Bertoya. And they were in mid-career at that point. And they went on to become really famous, right? So this was my first store. This is the Golden Owl Silversmith shop in the summer of 1968. I was also doing summer stock theater at the same time. The next summer, friends of mine invited me to Stone Harbor, New Jersey, because they had a surf shop, and they said, you can be in the back and make your jewelry and everything like that. So I went there for the first summer, and I did so much better than the surf shop that the next summer I was in the front and they were in the back, and the next summer they were gone, and I became Solar Wind Silversmiths, and I painted the facades of these buildings here, right? That summer in 1969, I went to Woodstock. And at Woodstock, I met a guy, a leathersmith, who is still at it doing what I do, Harvey Greenewald. And this is Harvey. And he said, oh, you guys, oh, you make jewelry? Oh, you should do the fairs. And we went, fairs? What are fairs? Oh, yeah, all these art fairs all over the country. You should do the fairs. You do great at the fairs. So 2 years later, we did our first fair. But before that, this is in East Stroudsburg. My brother, Todd Mann, and I opened Mountain Gallery, Solar Wind Silversmiths, and Earthlight Supply Natural Foods, because we were all vegetarian and we had to get food somewhere. We were driving into New York or Philly to get food, so we started on natural foods. Earthlight Supply still exists, and they still use the logo that I designed for it in 1972. This is my first apprentice, Peter Carlson. We went on to build a business that just was at the right place at the right time, just incredible. And it's all history since then. So the arts and crafts movement, 1880 to 1920. You know about this? You know about the objects that have come out of this? This is the time frame of Macintosh and the Green and Green architects and Tiffany and all of those kinds of makers, where there was a resurgence of interest in the handmade that started in Europe. It transferred to England and then to America. It was amazing, the kind of work, the quality of the work, and everything that came out of that movement. But it was gone and disappeared by the 1920s. It had disappeared into industry. Craft had become a design resource for industry. And it is happening again now. It might as well be 1920 now, because the same thing is taking place. This is Eileen Webb. She was the daughter of a very famous and wealthy family in New York City, but she had an interest in craft, especially quilting. And she would spend her summers in the Black Mountains of North Carolina. And then she was witnessing the fact that all of these women making the quilts had no outlet for their work. So she began transporting their work to New York City and putting up shows and everything like that for them. And that quickly morphed into representing all craft. And the parallel item that was taking place at the same time was the GIs returning from World War II. So this is American Craft Gallery. This is the first craft-specific retail venue that took place in New York. It was across the street from the Museum of Modern Art, and it was a narrow, long hallway that was converted into a craft venue. That was my first exposure to what craft could be, because I was living here in the Pocono Mountains, and New York was only an hour and a half away. I was in New York City all the time. American Craft Council was enjoying the fact that there was a burgeoning group of artists who were all exploring the different craft mediums. You name the medium, there was somebody in it somewhere. RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology, was the first one that really focused on crafts as an actual academic, learning curve. And then there were other kinds of schools that open around the country, like CCAC in Berkeley, and a lot of others, right? Well, they all got incorporated into American Crafts Council because the Crafts Council offered them a marketing venue for their work. They started the first craft fairs in the United States that were focused on basically the quote unquote high end of American craft. And they started in Mount Snow, Vermont, and they moved to Bennington, and then to Rhinebeck, New York. And I started doing those shows in 1972, and they made my career. Rhinebeck, and then Baltimore and San Francisco and Dallas and Atlanta, all of those shows the American Crafts Council put up, provided basically the venues where the artists who were burgeoning at the time, and we were all the descendants. Our generation, the boomer generation, was the descendants of the World War II GI vets, and Craft Horizons magazine, which became American Craft magazine, and we all plugged into it in the early 70s, and we drove that whole craft movement up to really high public awareness. I contend that the golden age of American craft was 1975 to 1995. This is Baltimore in 2006. I detected a change in the environment in the late 90s, but we were still doing those fairs because they were the source of our opportunity to wholesale our work to craft venues around the country and the world, and to sell directly to the public ourselves. At the same time, though we did not know it, we were being sourced. We were being sourced by foreign entities for our look and our presence in the world. And this is my crew in 1995, the height of my business. I had 26 employees. We couldn't make enough stuff. But it's all been downhill since then. These are a couple of my craft fair booths I've done over the years. I'm a theater designer, a set designer, so I get bored with the booth. So I just keep recreating them constantly. This is a Smithsonian show on the left-hand side, and a booth I designed for it 1 year. That I was one of my favorite booths of all time. The one on the lower left. In 1988, I opened Gallery IO in New Orleans. I bought a building in the lower Garden District of New Orleans. All my friends thought I was crazy because it was so dangerous. It was a really dangerous neighborhood. But I knew that's how things go. My example of this with Rick and Ruth Snyderman of the Works Gallery in Philadelphia. They did the same thing on South Street. They opened a gallery in a really bad part of town and became the anchor around which the whole neighborhood flipped. The same thing happened for me with Gallery IO. I bought the building for $120,000, 5,000 square feet of usable space, and transformed it into offices, sculpture studio, gallery, and jewelry studio. We got an award just a couple of years before we left it as one of the coolest retail jewelry spots in the United States. The golden age of American craft. This says 1980 to 1995. I say 75 to 95, somewhere in there. Then in the late 90s, things started to change. 10 overlapping reasons. Check this out. On this site stood a local market bankrupted by the monopolistic, make it cheaper than China, anti-union big box store where you shop. Is that your sign? No. And this isn't my sign either. I was behind a Walmart truck driving down the highway, and I followed it for at least 10 miles, taking a number of pictures because it was prototypical of the situation we were all faced with, right? Walmart, we sell for less, right? And so this is really what was happening, is that design was leaving the United States and coming back in the form of products that transformed the idea of Americans of what handmade products should cost. I have numerous examples when I teach Design for Survival of artists whose work was basically copied directly by entities like Pottery Barn, Crate and Barrel, Target, Walmart, and brought back to the United States at prices that we could never compete with as the makers. And there they are, okay? So here are the 10 reasons I believe, and actually there's a lot more who have accumulated since then. One is the internet. So the internet was predicted to be the retail mechanism of the future when it reached male-female parity, which was predicted to happen in 2004. That parity was reached in 2000, and retail on the internet exploded. I put up the first e-commerce website in crafts world in 1995. I am now making 80% of my company's income online. China. American retailers mined the look of American crafts movement for a proven popular public design and had it all made in China, then brought it back and presented it to the public at prices that the American maker could not compete with. There are instances I could tell you about where the product that they was sent to China came back and was in Pottery Barn with the maker's marks on it. Still on it. Yes. And $30,000 later, they quit the suit because the big boxes can outlast them. A copyright or a trademark is only as good as your willingness to defend it. Okay, market penetration tactics. So all of those kinds of pricings undermine the fact that when we make this kind of work, we can't make it as cheaply as other entities can. And one of the major entities that's doing this to this day is called Etsy, because Etsy allowed DIY makers to present their work to the general public for sale, but in most cases, they do not know how to price their work professionally. They price their work to make enough money to buy more stuff, to make more stuff, right? So they undermine the professional ability to sustain their livelihoods as a result. And so they're a spoiler to the whole deal, which is another component of the demise of the American crafts movement, just like the arts and crafts movement of the last centuries. All right. Art in the schools, all through the 80s and 90s, they decided the education system, we have to focus on the basics. So they eliminated the art programs as being unnecessary. As a result, we have 4 generations coming out of schools with no knowledge of the arts, no appreciation for them, and no expectation that they will ever be part of their lives. So we are suffering from the fact that we don't have succeeding generations of interest in our work. My generation enjoyed the salute of the boomer generation. They made us famous. They made us wealthy. They allowed us to have a standard American lifestyle. They allowed us to send our kids to college. They allowed us to buy houses. They made it possible for us to have a reasonable lifestyle. But that's really difficult now, even for someone who's still in the mix, like I am, and like you all are, right? So art in the schools was one of the most egregious decisions the American education system could have made. Now, fortunately, there were pockets here and there of the arts continuing, and so we're not completely devoid of the opportunity to have an audience, but we can't reach the audience in the same way we used to. The fairs were a primary model of the way that we access the public. The craft fairs and art fairs in the United States are now an obsolete business model. They're still operating. They're still doing okay. I still do them. I'm doing 3 more this month, right? I'm putting my toe back in that water to see what's happening out there. But I'm not optimistic. I'm cautiously pessimistic, if there is such a thing. Okay. And the other thing about the XYs and millennials is that if they do have disposable income, they spend it on experience. They live lightly, they travel a lot, and if they do buy art, they put it on their bodies. All right, the boomers, I already talked about that. We can move on. IP rights. China continues to disrespect the intellectual property rights of American artists, except for Ivanka. She's got a good deal, right? The craft and art fairs, I've just been talking about that. We can move on. Contemporary jewelry venues. There used to be a lot of them. I mean, literally craft galleries that focus just on contemporary jewelry, right? There's only about 3 or 4 left. Gallery IO in New Orleans is one of them, right? But if you have an association with any of these galleries, you have to be in support of them. Is anybody here in the retail contemporary jewelry business? No? Okay. Well, if you have an opportunity to interact with any of these people who represent contemporary jewelry, give them all support you possibly can. And I don't care what medium you're in, support that venue that gives you that support. And that means that you advertise for them, you publish the fact that you show with them, you have trunk shows with them, you do everything you can to keep them alive, because their profit margin is less than yours if you do it right. Okay. The government. We've had a series of, regressive, conservative governments that have always looked at the arts as a place where they can cut funding. Unlike other countries like Australia and Britain and France and everything, that they value the arts so much that they have huge support for the artist systems in their country. Our NAEA is a joke. It's a joke. The NEA in the United States is a complete joke about what they fund and how susceptible they are to political manipulation. The 21st century begins. This is a piece I did on a call for tiles at the American Crafts Council, the American Craft Museum, for a commentary about the 9/11. So I did it as a tile, and then I did it as a pin, and it was a very heartfelt and lovely piece. This is in the permanent collection at MAD. And then 2005, we had Hurricane Katrina, and Hurricane Katrina came in today. It came in today, 17 years ago. Right. And I was in Michigan at the time doing fairs, and I went home to a wrecked city, and that's another whole long story that I can't get into right now. Oh, and the next reason, number 11, the freaking 2008 financial collapse, right? That was another big blow to the whole thing, because then people just stopped buying. And, that whole kind of scenario continues. So what the hell do you do? All right. So you go to work, you double the effort, you keep the faith, you build a team, you dig the creative dirt and mine it for diamonds. That's what you do. That's what you do as an artist, regardless of whether there's a public response or not. You stay true to your mission to be the creative individual that the culture absolutely has to have in its midst. 200 days on the road. I don't do this anymore, but back in the day I did. One of my solutions was to try out following the model of a couple of other famous jewelry designers. I hired a marketing director and said, get me on QVC. And she said, okay, I'm going to get it done. It took 2 years. She got me on QVC. We would license earring and necklace design to them that we weren't doing anymore. And they would have them made in, guess where? In China, right? And I would go on air. I did this 4 times. I would go on air in their studios outside of Philadelphia at 4 o'clock in the morning, because the primary audience was California at 1 o'clock in the morning. And they would sell 1,500 units of a pair of earrings or a necklace inside of an hour. And I found out later on the deal. So this little necklace that you see right there was a piece that I would normally sell for $150 retail. That means I would wholesale it for $75. On QVC, it retailed for $45. Retailed for $45, and they were making a 700% markup on their cost. And it was done so well that I could have put it in my line and nobody would have known the difference. Right? So it was revelatory about how that world worked. This is the workshop I did called Project Object. I had we selected 4 teams of 4 metalsmiths to compete with each other, just like Project Runway. And we did it over a period of a week, and I had the whole thing filmed and turned into a DVD. I pitched it to Bravo. They never responded. I was hoping to get the next kind of Project Runway as a craft focused kind of thing that we can end up doing in every medium. There have been some things like it since then, but they're not what I had in mind. Right. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to go back. So Angel, my business manager, and I, right after we did Project Object at the Baum School in Allentown, Pennsylvania, that's where we staged it, we flew to the Craft and Hobby Association show in Anaheim, California. This is where Michaels and Hobby Lobby go to shop for product. And I said, we should go check this out, because I think that that world only knows how to cut things out of materials with one of 2 tools, being a knife or a scissors, because they don't know about the jeweler's saw, because the jeweler's saw is capable of sawing shapes out of materials ranging from paper to steel. Oh, thank you. Adjustment in camera. Okay. The next year we went back to that show, and I designed a booth that was built in my friend Aaron Kramer's studio in Venice, California. And we set this all up. And you see in the foreground, that's a sawing bench. So it was a circular sawing bench. People came in and we trained them how to use a jeweler saw. We had a kit together with a DVD, a manual, and tools and materials and everything like that, so to be sold wholesale as a kit. And we said, well, who are we selling to? I said, well, it's probably going to be like bead shops and mom and pop hobby and stuff like that. 3 hours into the show, guess who was in our booth? Michaels. And guess what Michael said? Where do you source? And you know what that meant? If you didn't source in China, they weren't interested. Because if you sourced in China, then they could beat you up on the price. But we ended up successfully selling that line of product to mom and pop bead shops and stores and everything for the next 5 or 6 years. One day I was doing the bead and button show in Milwaukee, and a woman walked into my booth with my little homemade little pamphlet about how to use a jeweler saw. And she said, you know, this really should be a book. And I said, okay, who are you? Her name was Tanya Davenport, and she was the editor for Northlight Books, which is an imprimatur of F&M Publishing. And literally 6 months later, this book came out. Angel and I flew to Cincinnati, and for 2 weeks, we shot every little example, little project that I had for the book, and they put it together as they were shooting it. And that book has sold through 17,000 copies worldwide, and it's now out of print, and I'm anxious to reprint it. So whenever I go to teach a workshop any place, and there's a high school with a jewelry program, I go and I offer to do free learn to saw workshops. In 2008, Craft in America, who you might know from a PBS show, Craft in America, they selected me to be part of a show, a series, a segment they were putting together called Messengers. So this is based on the show that I put together post Katrina called Storm Cycle. And they were really interested in documenting what that meant, what it meant for New Orleans, et cetera. And that has been hugely important for our success as a company, because that show, Storm Cycle, traveled to 14 museums and art centers around the country for 5 years after its creation. This is me teaching a workshop and in Vail. At the name of the school is what? In Vail. Say again? Anderson Ranch. This is at Anderson Ranch, and it's a show. It's a workshop I teach on how to make using jewelry skills to make really precise sculptural models that can scaled up to large size without any change to their dimensions or anything like that. This is Pam Reimers, and she went to Moore College of Art, and as a senior project, she came to New Orleans and was our intern for a number of months. We do maker fairs, and this is so cool, because this little girl is 4 years old, and she sawed like a champ. Right. These are workshops around the country. The lower right is in Hobart, Tasmania, at a technical school where they train people for the trades, and at Pocosin Art Center in North Carolina. The shirt that I have on is my bench pin. And I designed this peculiar bench pin for our staff because we don't like the traditional bench pin mounted to the face of a bench because of transition and height and everything. So I designed a bench pin that's on the surface of the bench. And then I would hand make them for many years. And then I had the idea to maybe make another process. So my friend Jonathan, who does the spoons, he's down in the gallery here in Peters Valley. He laser cut these bench pins for me, but they were cut out of plywood, so they weren't really strong. So one day I'm at the Beat 'em Button show, and the owner of Eurotool comes over and he says, "Hey, that's really interesting." That I said, "What?" "The bench pin. Would you care to license it?" I said, "Oh, sure. Come on." And his name is Peter. I said, "Peter, you know how to saw?" He said, "No." I said, "You sell jewelry tools and you don't know how to use a jeweler's saw. Come over here. I'm going to teach you how to saw." Well, that became a bonding experience for both of us. And literally 6 months later, the first bench pins made in hardwood with I redesigned the C clamp for it. They put it together in a package with an artist statement in it from me and how to use the bench pin. And it's all made in Pakistan, right? And it retails for $28. My licensing deal gives me 6% of wholesale. So $14, figure out 6% of right there, Julie. Yeah, there you go, about $1. Last month I got a check for $250 from Eurotool. I got a check every month. They're selling the hell out of it. Right. Okay, income stream. So we're getting to the end here. So hang in there. Back in the day, 1995, TMD, which is Thomas Mann Design, almost 100% of our income came from retail fairs, right? We had wholesale accounts all over the country. So I think retail was maybe 70% and wholesale was 30%. Gallery IO, our own bricks and mortar store, did really good then. And then I had thomasmann.com online, retail online, but it wasn't really doing very much in 95. People weren't hip to it yet, right? We switched to now. thomasmann.com, retail online, is our primary income source. Gallery IO, bricks and mortar, secondary source. Studio Flux workshops and products at home and on the road, tertiary. Thomas Mann artist events for sculpture, jewelry, painting, and prints. TMD wholesale to domestic and international accounts, way down. In 1995, we had 250 accounts. Right now, we have less than 25, right? And TMD at retail fairs is way off the mark. My rule of thumb is that if you do a fair, you have to do 3 times the cost of doing the fair to break even. And you're only making money after that as profit after you hit that mark. Okay, artists are by definition entrepreneurs. The largest percentage of self-employed, self-motivated, self-sustaining small business. Many artists, including myself, chose art as their work because they thought it wasn't mainstream career and therefore did not require mainstream behavior. In fact, art is mainstream and requires mainstream behavior from the artist in order to achieve success and survival. If you have the desire to become a professional artist, you also assume a critical role in the culture. You take on an important personal mission that benefits people in ways you may never personally experience. You have the responsibility to survive in order to fulfill your mission. This means that you must acquire the knowledge and master all of the skills that you thought you'd get out of by becoming an artist. Pricing your work, the pivot point of success. So we did this bit this morning, and it's always revealing about where you're coming from, where you're going, and what you have to do in order to be here to survive to do the work you're here to do. And that's all, folks. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone out there in the world, for being with us tonight. Support Peters Valley. We need this school like crazy, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in the future somewhere out on the road. Cheers.
All right. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for giving your talk. You shared so much information. Thank you for sharing your experience with us and your journey in the craft world. At this time, if you'd like, we can take questions for Thomas. He does. He just reunited with an old friend, I think, in the back. But yes, if you have any questions for Thomas, you can enter them in the chat now and I'll read them off. Or if anyone in the audience has questions, we can take them as well. All right. Oh, thank you. Let me get out of the share screen and I think I'll be able to see it. All right. This is a pretty historic event for Peters Valley. We've never done like a hybrid of like question and answer. So please be patient with me. All right. If you haven't, I don't know if I can do anything with a raised hand. I apologize. But if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A below. Yeah. Any questions?
Any questions here? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A lot of our crowd in person had the pleasure of taking Thomas Mann's class, so they had so many. Yes, we have a question here. How much money did you make on QVC?
Well, it was actually
Thomas.
Back over here.
Sorry, we gotta do both.
Okay, how much money did I actually make on QVC? So my deal with QVC is I got 6% of retail, as opposed to the industry standard of getting 6% of wholesale. So if a piece sold for $35 and I got 6% of it, how much was that? $1.80. $1.80, right? Something like that. Over the course of 4 events with QVC, where I'd go on air at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd be sleeping in my car in the parking lot. I'd go in and sit in their green room for a little while and then go on air and then go back and drive to Allentown to my mom's house or whatever. Over 4 events, we figured I made about $36,000. No, that was not good. That was not good. Listen, do you know who Robert Lee Morris is? Okay, so he's a New York City based jewelry designer, big into fashion, in all the magazines. He became a QVC star. He makes $8 million a year. Right? So you gotta, but I couldn't stand the kind of moral sacrifice you would have to make to get to those kinds of numbers, because I would watch him on air talk bullshit about the work that he was presenting, and was never up to speed. None of it was up to speed of what he was normally capable of making, but he, at the end of towards the end of his career there, New York City was no longer supportive, and he was looking for the next thing too. And I was experimenting with what the next thing might be for us. And unfortunately, I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the negative kind of vibe I felt there. All right. And the money wasn't good enough to keep me in it.
That considered successful for QVC? Were you considered successful sellers for them at those figures?
Was I considered successful by QVC for what I was doing? Now, here's one of the big clues to the way the world works, is that all opportunities that come to us through connections, human connections. Everyone, you can't just like, you put it out there, you put it out there, you put it out there, you meet one person, you've been waiting for this thing to happen, and all of a sudden that opportunity is thrown in your lap, right? So the woman who was my agent at QVC was a graduate of Moore College of Art. She was a jewelry designer herself. When she was so successful at bringing people in like me, they bumped her up. She was no longer my agent. They gave me two young women who were fresh out of a marketing MBA program, who were completely clueless about contemporary jewelry, who I was, what I was. All they cared about was numbers. And that was another, knife in the back as far as I was concerned. So I quit them. Yeah.
All right, we've got some questions on Zoom. We'll go with Jeannie's first. What are you excited about now?
What am I excited about now? Well, I've returned to painting. So I just recently put up my first solo painting show at a gallery in New Orleans, and I'm going to be doing my first art fair in November as a painter. And I learned painting. I studied painting in college, and my degree is in technical theater and set design. I painted big sets and scrims and all kinds of stuff. And I've always had that in me to go find that out. And I've been making jewelry for 60 years now, and I have arthritis in my hands from all of this kind of stuff, So I'm looking for something that might be a little bit less demanding in that way. I still will design, and I'll still support my company, but I'm kind of stepping away from it a little bit because I'm really excited about painting.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Are you still doing sculptures? Judith asks.
Sculptures are always going to be a part of my interest and my play. Unfortunately, at the moment, I don't have a place to build big work. And I actually got to a place when I did have a sculpture studio where I said, yeah, that's it. I'm not building anything bigger than me. Because building the bigger stuff is always kind of complicated to price and execute and make sure it happens, and all the negotiations. I have 3 big public art pieces up in New Orleans, and I'm happy to kind of leave that kind of world behind. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't make smaller sculptures, tabletop, pedestal top, things like that. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a sculptor working in the medium of jewelry. So all of my work is sculptural.
Judith also asks, has the style of your work changed throughout the years, and what's it called?
Judith Krongle.
If it had
Hi,
a
Judith.
name.
I started off with basically making what I call neo-Scandinavian highly polished silver jewelry. That's what I learned in high school. That's what I learned when I was working for the silversmiths in Allentown. And that's what my brother and I continued to do in the early years of our business in the early 70s. Mid 70s, I started experimenting with found objects because I'd been building theater set models over the years, even during and after college. And all those models involved all kinds of other materials to make them work. So I started incorporating those same materials in jewelry. And by the late 70s, my business partner's going, what is this crap you're making? And I went, well, it's the kind of crap I think I have to go make. And so I'm gonna go make it. So we should break up the business and sell the property, and everybody cash out and move on. My brother bought the natural food business from another partner and I, and ran it for another 10 years. And my other partner was our accountant. He went back to the accounting business and whatever. And I went on to basically be a starving artist for 5 years while I invented what would eventually become techno-romantic jewelry objects. And I remember the first show that I did with just techno-romantic. I drove from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to do the Lakefront Art Festival. And all I had was a Citgo credit card. And I got to that show and I set up the booth and I'm going, this is it, live or die here. I won first prize in craft and I sold out. And I had discovered a look that just took off like crazy over the next 10 years. My business doubled every year from 1982 to 1994.
Oh. All right. Let's see.
You want me to read that?
I can read that.
Okay,
So
read it.
Beth Judge, she asked, for artists that make one-of-a-kind, limited production jewelry pieces, has the pandemic and corresponding rise in online shopping made it easier or harder to sell their creations? I found pre-pandemic people wanted to see touch work prior to buying.
Touchy-feely is always going to be an important part of what people want to experience before they make a decision to buy. So our job is to get as many people as possible to have that experience and get them on our mailing list. Now the world is working by connections. You have to build a family of support. Used to be, you get your mom and your dad to support you. Now you have to get everybody to support you. They have to get you in your nest. Now, I am watching several artists who do Instagram every day. And they sell the work that they put up on Instagram every day. So there are new marketing methods by which we can all exactly do the same thing. I wonder if I didn't have a staff to do that for me, would I do it myself? I don't know the answer to that unless it was actually presented to me as a challenge, because right now I have a very talented marketing staff of 3 who do a great job of putting me out there in the world. So that's it. You got to create a family.
Judith questions, did you know that your work is sold on eBay?
I'm completely aware that my work is sold on eBay, and I have people who collect like crazy, and I buy it too. So we buy it on eBay and we fix it up and we resell it. So, but I have people who are collecting ravenously, waiting for the moment I check out of the planet. And they send me images of their collections asking me to document it so that they can basically have a, what's the right word? Provenance. They're looking for provenance. So we do it as much as we possibly can. Most of the work they're buying is production stuff, and it may or may not be really that much more valuable in the future, but certainly the one-of-a-kind work that is stamped man-made on the back is going to be worth more than the production line.
All right.
That's it.
That's it.
Thank you, everyone. Yay!
All right. Thank you so much again, Thomas. Thanks for everyone who joined us in person or on Zoom. Thank you so much. If you have any questions for Thomas, you can also go onto his website anytime, thomasmann.com. All right. Have a good evening. Hello, and thank you so much for watching this program. Peters Valley would like to thank its sponsors for making programs like this possible. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Peters Valley's channel to receive more like it in the future.